Hello everyone, welcome to day 24 of our 30 days of PM challenge. It's been a wonderful journey so far. We are towards the end of our last leg of our 30 days of PM journey, and today we will be looking at North Star metrics. I think in our previous video we discussed about what are metrics in essence and what essentially does product metrics involve in them, what sort of metrics do you need to track, what is the game framework from Gojek, and how you can build and figure out the right metrics to track for a specific feature. In this we'll consider and understand about how you can use these metrics for individual products and product features, treat them as input metrics, and eventually get to the goal of defining a North Star metric, which is your most important metric that you track and try to measure through the series of input metrics and other proxy metrics and that you have, right? North Star metric, in order to define that, the simplest way I can explain it it is essentially a way to measure success for the product, right? It's a way for you to understand whether a product is growing and whether it's doing the job it's supposed to do, right? So if there is growth and if you see improvement in the North Star metric over period of time, you can tell that the product is growing. It essentially is trying to solve a few things. The main purpose is, in essence, for what the North Star metric is trying to do, and for an organization, why it matters, is it helps you get clarity and aligns the entire organization towards a single metric to look out for and improve upon, right? To give an example, Netflix during their early days used retention within their platform as a way, as a North Star metric to always improve retention in through all the features that they are developing and building and the shows that they have listed on their platform, right? So retention was a key metric they used to track earlier during the days, not really a key North Star metric at this moment. But yeah, there are multiple reasons for that, right? You can't really have look at retention for everything possible. Netflix has diversified into not just video but also games within their platform, and they have multiple other user engagement metrics they are looking for. But during their early days, the retention within the platform was a key metric or the North Star metric that they used to track. But coming back to our topic, the main purposes that a North Star metric solves for is brings in clarity and brings in alignment within the team. It communicates the impact and how and where the impact needs to be put into place and what needs to grow and how, and looking at the progress for that, right? So if, for example, within your organization you have a North Star metric defined where for a certain set of users, if they do X activity in Y days, we call it a success. For example, using the input metrics and drive and improve on the North Star metric that we have defined, right? So this is a way for you to impact, understand progress, and it eventually is a way to hold teams accountable, not just the product. It obviously is accountable, and product teams are accountable to improve and look after that metric and keep track of that metric over a period of time. But it isn't really only tied to the product team. It also applies to the entire organization, where you are working towards a single goal of improving that North Star metric over period of time, which eventually ties down into also improving business, product, user satisfaction, and growing subscription and the revenue generated by the organization through your product, right? So to give another example about a North Star metric defined for Facebook, so Facebook during their very early days, right, they're essentially not metric was the number of users adding at least 7 friends in the first 10 days, right? So you see the way the North Star metric is articulated and is defined is very precise to the point and very focused on a singular goal, is to have users interact, have users also see the value and track that as well over a period of time, right? So if I were to divide the statement, right, the statement goes number of users adding 7 friends in the first 10 days. So let's just divide it into three parts. So the first part is number of users, which is a real quantitative metric that you can track, which is the number, daily active users, monthly active users, weekly active users, or in this case it was over a 10 period horizon, right? So that's because of the product strategy. We have put the number of users in the first 10 days, right? The product strategy indicates that you have urgency. You want to use Facebook as a way to socially signal about your usage of the platform to the friends, and add 7 friends within your Facebook account, or send a friend request, right? Which shows and tracks for customer value. So the number of user is a quantitative metric that indicates growth. The adding 7 friends is the customer value side of things, which shows the motivation for a user to invite and talk and have their friends on Facebook in the first 10 days, which talks about the strategy of defining the network effect to be kicking in, right? So if you see, within 10 days, a customer logs into Facebook, is using Facebook, and also adds a, a few friends, 7 in this case, we consider the North Star metric to be performing well. I mean, if all the indicators are positive and the metrics are growing over a period of time. So there are three input metrics in your North Star metric, based on the criteria or the definition you have given to your North Star metric. So this is how you define a North Star metric. Use that as a way to bring in clarity, bring in alignment, have the product team accountable, and also look at progress and growth over a period of time. So this essentially is the concept of, in Facebook case, as we through the statement, it's example of how social networks and social media, digital interfaces work, right? So this is also applies similarly to social media platforms and how they define the North Star metric. There are also examples of multiple organization and how they have defined their North Star metric, which is not really accurate at this point of time, but hypothetical ways that these product teams use to track their North Star metric, right? In case of Netflix, the number of the time stamp spent by subscribers streaming content, which is the retention rate we were talking about. In case of LinkedIn, it's the monthly active users within the platform, which is more straightforward, where the user is actually, because there can be multiple things a platform does, right? In LinkedIn's case, it does hiring. It also, I mean, you can apply for jobs, you can hire, you can share content, you can interact with users, you can create your network and be a social media influencer. So there are multiple personas to deal with. So in order to simplify, you can obviously define a key metric around these goals, but uh, ideally organizations, for example, also like Notion, the bigger organization like Figma, they don't really, their main goal or main North Star metric is to improve and increase revenue, because these sort of products cater to multiple personas and they have multiple behavior sort of levers and levels of users with certain sort of behavior or usage within the product, right? So in those cases, revenue ideally becomes your North Star metric. But in these other sessions, right, for example, Gojek gives their number of completed orders as a North Star metric, which makes sense in their case, right? So because they are a super app ideally, but they also have their Gojek services for cab, I mean, which is essentially a transport service, right, for moving, reaching from one place to the other. And the number of completed orders gives you an indicator of how many rides actually happen. It also talks about the user value. It also gives idea of the business value being generated, right? The number of rides taken care implies the amount of revenue generated, right? The bigger the revenue generated, the bigger the number is, and the bigger the number of rides that completed will be. So this is how you define these metrics for your own product. And ideally these North Star metrics fall into a series of categories, right? So not all North Star metrics are the same for all organization. It depends within the organization, right? So these ideally fall into like six broad categories. They are in terms of revenue, the ARR through the product, the GMV through the project, through the product. The other section after revenue is customer growth. How many paid users are using your product, and how much market share do you currently have? So you can have North Star metrics based around paid users, the market share increase over a period of time. You can look at the consumption cycles, right? For and how many messages, for example, are being sent on WhatsApp, and how many, for example, hotels or bookings have been made through Airbnb for a night for a period of time. Engagement wise is another way you can define your North Star metric. In this case, we see examples of Facebook, LinkedIn, Slack on the MAUs and DAUs, right? So this is on the engagement side of thing. This can also be your North Star metric. You have the growth efficiency, right, in terms of sales. What is the customer acquisition cost? Has it gone down over a period of time, and how much margin do you have on each customer that you onboard, right? So this is another sort of North Star metric that you can track, or category that you can fit your North Star metric to be in. And the last one is user experience, which is, for example, NPS scores and surveys and reviews with customers, right? So uh, having a better score on these user experience sort of measuring frameworks and formats, you can also define your North Star metric. So if customer satisfaction becomes your North Star metric, it would fall under the user experience category. And improved user experience means improved retention. Improved retention means decrease in churn rate. Decrease in churn rate automatically signals growth in revenue, right? So this is how you can categorize into six major categories: revenue, customer growth, consumption growth, engagement growth, growth efficiency of growth, and the user experience, right? So this ideally is a few broad categories you can define these two. And for example, for each industry, the North Star metric also changes, right? If you are, for example, a consumer subscription product, you will look at engagement, like in the case of Netflix, and look at growth. If you are, for example, a ad driven business, you look at engagement by running ads. And you, for user generated content, you look at the consumption of the content, right? For B2B products, you look at the growth of the product, the sales made, and the engagement of users within the product, and things like that. So these are a few other ways you can expand on and categorize these on. But North Star metrics ideally ends up in organizations like Airbnb, Miro, Tinder, Spotify. They are actually purchased for a specific sort of ask, so they avoid using revenue as the North Star metric, right? But companies like Figma, Notion, Patreon, and Superhuman, for instance, they don't really have like a key metric they are trying to solve look for, because they have various purposes, right? Figma is used for design but also for brainstorming. Notion for note taking but also organizing data. Patreon, same case. Superhuman is for organizing your emails, but it is also for productivity increases, and having a better interface in terms of UX of email clients, right? To send and receive emails. So these sort of products are more broad in terms of their use case and potential use cases and scenarios a user is using them for. So in that case, it becomes more revenue focused North Star metrics for these sort of organizations. But for products that have a specific job to be done, or specific action or outcome to be achieved from its usage, you avoid focusing on the revenue side of things, right? So for example, Snapchat, instead of looking at the revenue generated per user, they look at the number of amount of time spent on the platform, right? If more time spent, you can probably engage them with ads, right? Generate revenue through that. So things like that. So you can categorize these into two buckets: a lot of broader products with multiple personas that they're dealing with, and multiple scenarios and use cases they solve for. It becomes more revenue focused, but otherwise it's more specific to the product and the job it's trying to do. So That's also a few more details around North Star metrics. But ideally, when it comes to metrics and all of that, you can use tools like Pendo. You have products like Amplitude, which give you analytics and helps you understand the whole user journey. You can experiment, do A/B testing with this, and also understand the customer data, right? And manage that also within the same platform. So yeah, these are a few tools that come to mind when it comes to product analytics and product metrics in essence. But yeah, as startups and as organizations, you have multiple frameworks for startup growth and multiple metrics to track for, right? So in example, you can track multiple MAUs. You can ask a few questions on how the MAU is performing and understand and take a call on what actually is going right or wrong. You can have the accounting framework when it comes to growth and growth hacking in essence, which is essentially a concept in the marketing side of things where you use your growth levers and through your social channels and all the other channels that you have activated to generate growth within the product, which in turn helps bring in more revenue to the company, right? So this is another great resource to understand what are the metrics, for example, a investor is looking for within your product, and from I mean at the life cycle of the product from its beginning to where it is now, and and where it wants to go next, right, with help from the VCs. So you have multiple sort of eh, metrics that a investor looks for, more on the ARR side, the customer side, and how things are being scaled and what are plans in the future and things like that. So they take their metrics very seriously, and try to understand how many users you actually have, how much churn rate do you really have, what's the net retention, what's the customer acquisition cost, what's the ARR, what's the MAUs and the DAUs of the product, right? So these are sort of metrics that even a VC will ask when you're trying to raise rounds and funding, right? But yeah, this is another such great resource you can look at. And when it comes to startups and organizations in general, to understand product market fit, which we've talked about in one of our previous sprints, and understand how MVPs are built to have and achieve PMFs for your product, right? And for that, you can look at retention curves rate, you can look at the power usage user curve rate, and the active versus registered users, right? And how that needs to be over 25%, and which helps validate the total addressable market that your organization and the product is trying to target and achieve, right? So that's about metrics. And we should also understand here that metrics are important. Metrics need to be tracked to understand progress, understand how things are growing over a period of time and where we are headed. But a lot of times, it's always the case that a lot of strategical decisions are taken uh, backed by data, but a lot of the times you might not have the data. So in those cases, how do you really make sure and take the right call by even not having data in that case, right? And a lot of the times, because of the number of metrics you're tracking, or potentially the wrong metrics you're tracking, it gives a bad impression when and bad and leads to consequences when it comes to business goals being achieved, right? If you are tracking things right and tracking the right metrics, you have the opportunity there to then actually understand the business outcomes and business generated following the North Star metric, and then improving upon it, right? But I mean, don't really, focus on metrics, focus on data, but just don't always take them with a pinch of salt, and don't really obsess over the numbers. Why, for example, a metric is not moving even after adding multiple features? It's probably you are tracking the metric wrong, or you have the wrong metric set in place as your North Star metric, right? Or as an input metric. So look at that, reevaluate, use the game framework, and create goals, create actions, create the metrics, whether they are real metrics or they are proxy metrics, which lead and which essentially proxy metrics are metrics that influence the core input and product North Star metric, right? So are these metrics user metrics, the real metrics, or proxy metrics? Are these metrics quantitative, I mean, based on ratios, or are they more on the magnitude side of things, right? So this is a great way to segment, and then you evaluate using the previous three steps, right? And improve and iterate upon that. So this essentially is a game framework. And how you can use that to define metrics and eventually get to your North Star metric. But yeah, don't all really fixate on these a lot of the times. Always iterate and improve, such that uh, your obsession with numbers is always there, but it doesn't and having like the wrong metrics being tracked shouldn't really affect the strategy or divert that. It should be backed by reasoning and actual reasoning of why we think a certain strategy needs to be adopted, even though the data is not present, but based on other validation metrics, right? Whether you have heard it from the industry, you have heard it from multiple customers, and from the demand that you predict, you probably want to make the call and take the decision, right? So that's another way on how you can rely on metrics but not completely rely on them for all your decisions, right? Always have your own thought and your own way of developing the product and going from there. But yeah, I think we've covered these as well. And when it comes to choosing the right North Star metric, these North Star metrics primarily focus on acquisition, the retention within the platform, and how ways to monetize and grow the subscription and the average customer value for the user, right? So North Star metrics are tied into that, and these metrics are used to monitor the key details of the product and through the input metrics, right? The North Star metric is your top metric to look at, whereas the North Star metric is influenced by multiple input metrics that a PM actually focuses on. Improving any of these input metrics will also eventually grow your North Star metric. But this is how sort of the structure looks like when you visualize it, and the components are the unit of value, the quality of the metric, and also the frequency of, for example, a particular action, right? So this is about product metrics and how you can define them. This is another great resource on where they talk about what is a metric, what are the types of metric, what is a good metric, and how to come up with these metrics, right? So if you look at the types of three types of metrics in explanation here, right? So the number of total prime members, the number of relevant recommendations, and the number of sellers, right? So this is in example for prime, but North Star metrics are a reflection of the vision. It brings in value, avoids confusion, helps align people to the same goal, and I mean, keeps the product team accountable, right? So we've already looked at this resources. What makes a metric good? It's useful, it's meaningful, it actually is tracking and is a primary input metric for your North Star metric. It's measurable, it's movable over a period of time, and shows progress based on even the smallest of changes. You can figure out and actually visualize and see the change in the metrics, positive or negative in trends. And when it comes to looking at and coming up with metrics, you can use the game framework, use the double A triple R framework, which is about awareness, acquisition, activation, engagement, revenue, retention. So these are multiple levers, multiple subsections that you can divide your actions into, and then make decisions on the key metrics to consider as primary and input metrics, and determine your North Star metric. So yeah, I think these were a few resources that you can look at to understand more on product metrics. Even here are a few metrics categorized in terms of awareness, where you're looking at the engagement, the number of visits; in terms of acquisition, the number of top of the funnel to the bottom of the funnel sort of things. Activation is the number of connections, the number of signups, the number of shares and things like that that can activate your product to multiple other customers. Engagements on the DAU, MAU sort of side. Revenue is on the churn rate, the revenue, customer acquisition cost, and GMV, and ARR for that matter. Retention again being the amount of time they spend, and how how I mean how are the users returning once they have used the platform? Are they returning regularly? Is it like a one time affair where they just log in and things like that? And when it comes to referrals, which are more on the user engagement side of things, you look at NPS scores, surveys, reviews, and things of that sort. So yeah, this is about product metrics and how you can use and create your North Star metrics by combining a series of input metrics and understanding and categorizing your metrics into the subsections of three, six types, and broadly categorize it under that, and look at what needs to be prioritized, and come up with a statement like we've seen in the case of Facebook, where they have like the core qualitative quantitative metric, the customer value, and also the time period or the product strategy metric definition as a part of the North Star metric definition, right? So that's been it. That's all about product metrics and North Star metrics to go about. I'll link all the resources we discussed in our YouTube video description, and then you can look at it, learn, and go from there. But yeah, thank you for joining. Thank you. If you have any questions, do drop them in the comments, and we'll be happy to answer and solve and provide more resources on this topic. But yeah, thanks for joining. See you tomorrow on another topic related to product, and we'll get go from there. Thank you. Bye.